Hello. The United Kingdom has been rocked by protests in recent weeks against a new film, The Lady of Heaven, which tells the tale of Lady Fatima, the daughter of Islam's Prophet Muhammad. But accusations of blasphemy from some Muslim protesters in the UK, as well as reported death threats and other intimidations, have led some movie theatres to cancel showings. Meanwhile, countries such as Iran, Morocco, Pakistan, and Egypt have banned the film, accusing it of flagrant falsification of the established facts of Islam or as a sectarian attack. Now, the British government appears to have taken a rather bold stand, with ministers criticising the cancellation of screenings as cancel culture. Just a few days ago, one very prominent British imam who served as an Islamophobia advisor to the UK government was fired because of his support for the protesters, those protesters accusing the producers and the writers behind this movie of blasphemy. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Malik Shlibak, the producer of Lady of Heaven and chairman at Rafida Foundation, a UK Shia organisation. He is taking a brief pause from the dozens of appearances in mainstream British media, and so I'm really most grateful for his time. I'd especially like to delve into the ideological forces behind the campaign against you and your film, analysis that I think most British media somewhat glossed over. But to start with, tell us about the film, tell us about what it's about, and why you think it might have evoked such angry reactions.
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on, Sam. I really do appreciate it. I've been a long-time subscriber of the Middle Eastern Forum, and you guys do great work, an open platform for different voices to put their opinions forward. So I do thank you for your hard work. Regarding the film, just to jump straight into it. So this is, The Lady of Heaven, as the title says, it is about the Lady of Heaven. And the Lady of Heaven is Lady Fatima, peace be upon her. She is the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family. And if anyone knows anything about Islam, they know that Lady Fatima, peace be upon her, is one of the, if not the most beloved figure in Islamic history after the Prophet himself. She is a holy figure. She is an icon, a role model for Muslims all across the world. The most holy, pure woman you can imagine. There's comparisons made to her of Lady Mary, the mother of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him. And the film, the goal of the film was to depict her story, to share her story with the world. Her story is relatively known in the Muslim world, although I would argue not the particulars or known as it should be. But the Western world really do not know of her story. Part of the work for this film, and also part of my work at the Rafida Foundation over the last 5 years, we've come to discover that most non-Muslims aren't even aware of the name Fatima. So it's at the same time an education project, because we do believe Lady Fatima is a beautiful role model for Muslims and non-Muslims. And Sam, the ironic thing with all this is one of the underpinning lessons this film teaches is how to oppose radicalism and terrorism. I don't want to go into all the plots of the film, although it is a historical narrative. The heart of the message of the lady is how to stand up to bullies and thugs who try to dictate and impose themselves on others. It's hugely ironic if we look at what's happened over the course of the past week or so in the UK, because the lady in the film is bombarded by aggression and threats, they even storm her house and set ablaze to her house because they're demanding for these groups at her time to be obeyed. And she doesn't give in. She doesn't succumb to their request. She remains firm on her principles and what her father taught her, and she loses her life because of that. And then when the film comes out, we see these mobs and thugs do the exact same thing as they did to her all that time ago, 1,400 years.
What is the gist of their complaint? What are they claiming this film threatens them with, or what are they claiming this film does that is so outrageous?
Well, they've thrown a whole slew of things into the mix. They seem to be updating their arguments every time their previous one gets put down. But I mean, you've heard things like the prophet is depicted, claims of racism, claims of falsehood. I mean, I can speak of all these if you give me time today, but to just jump straight into their primary reason, which they've been very open about, is that they are offended. And why are they offended? Because, I mean, let's just be honest about it. We don't need to beat around the bush. We can speak clearly, in clear terms, in simple language, and just figure out what's going on here. And the crux of the matter is that the film depicts Abu Bakr and Umar, as well as characters like Aisha. These names are, of course, names that are well known in Islamic history. It depicts them as criminals and thugs and bullies and, to be very frank, radical extremists. This is the Shia position. This is the historical mainstream Shia. I mean, if you want to call it Ithna Ashari, Imami, Ja'fari, there's many different names used, but it's the Shia mainstream narrative. Any academic, or actually, to be very frank, any average Joe who has done even the slightest bit of reading on Islam knows that this is the mainstream Shia narrative. So what's the contention here? What's the issue? It's that their narrative believes that these characters, Abu Bakr and Aisha, as well as others, were the greatest of people to have lived. Their claim goes as far to say that these people were the greatest to have lived after the Prophet, from the nation, from the people, from the nation of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family. So it's a very, there's a huge contrast here in positions. I mean, the exact opposite positions are being held. So if okay, we can see that contrast there. So what they're claiming is, because they believe, as I've just explained what they believe, and because that offends them to such a deep level of offense, therefore the Shia side, or any other side for that matter, because you should be aware that there are non-Muslim academics from the Western world that have concluded the same as the Shia narrative has concluded, based on general unbiased history. So their claim is that because we are offended by these things, and because it doesn't fall in line with what we believe, therefore we have the right to silence you, bully you, threaten you with violence, demand action to be taken against you by the government, and for cinemas to ban your film, which is clearly an artistic expression of the general mainstream Shia narrative of history. And we go even further than that, Sam. We say that, and we did actually do this. We spent a year pre-production going through history, collecting all sort of historical texts, and everything in our history is found. And I say, and that needs to be underlined, everything in our film and history is found in the historical texts of the denomination of Islam that refers to itself as Sunni. You can refer to Tariq Tabari, you can refer to Bukhari, Muslim, these sort of classical works that they take from. All of what we have in our history is found in their books. So it's not actually a purely Shia narrative here.
Okay. So the film has been banned, as I mentioned, in quite a few countries, but the one that stands out to most people, I think, who have followed media coverage of this issue, is Iran, because much of the media has been painting this as a sectarian thing. And even you have somewhat pointed out that you're taking the Shia position, and I think implicitly that a lot of your opponents are Sunni, but it is banned in Iran as well. So what is the reason for other Shia dissatisfaction with the film?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that, and I will answer that. If I could just add one point to the previous line of thought here, is that I do want to emphasize this point, just because I know, just so you're aware, I'm from a Sunni background myself, actually. I've been Shia maybe five or 6 years or so. And I know the majority of Muslims are decent, rational-minded, fair individuals. And I know for a fact, because I've been speaking to them over the past week, that a lot of them are scratching their heads at the reaction they've seen from prominent figures, like the government advisor, like Dr. Sheikh, like the Muslim Scottish Council, British Scottish Council, Oxford Islamic Centre. A lot of general Muslims from all denominations are scratching their head at this bigotry they're seeing, of trying to censor and silence one side. And I mean, it's really something shocking, but I'll end here on this specific point. I do want to emphasize this because there is this sort of deep-rooted self-entitlement where they feel that they own. I mean, if I had to put it blankly, I was going to say they feel like they own the religion of Islam. They think they own the world. It's ludicrous. They have to realize that who gave them the authority to dictate which party or which side can express their views in history. The offense is equal on both sides, Sam. If I can just emphasize and highlight this point, both beliefs offend each other equally, because, you know, in one side, Abu Bakr and Umar are criminals, and the other side, you know, cherish them. But in the flip side, the one side sees Abu Bakr and Umar as the killers and murderers of Lady Fatima and the Prophet. So if they go around praising these individuals, Shia find that deeply offensive. Do you see large radical protests from Shia? Do you see us shutting down their films? And again, I'm not making this a sectarian issue. It isn't actually a Shia-Sunni issue. It's an issue of the fair-minded Muslims versus a very fringe minority radical group of Muslims that are trying to push this kind of bigotry in the Muslim community. So the offense goes both ways. The correct approach going forward is to just sort of be fair about things, allow different parties to express their views openly, and, you know, discussions and debates can happen and will happen. But coming to your question, which I think I remember, is regarding the Iran ban, I believe.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, that's it's a very good question. I try to answer in a concise manner as I can. Firstly, Iran itself is, as far as I'm concerned, specific. It's a political entity, nothing more than that. They represent their politics, and they are in the game of preserving their authority in the region and expanding their authority in the region. So their banning it has nothing to do with theology, if anyone wants to make that claim, because, I mean, people have made the claim, they are currently making the claim, and it will bite them back, the claim that this narrative isn't mainstream Shia Islam. That's the most outlandish claim any human can make. And I was going to say I'm shocked that they're making, but I'm not shocked, because they've tried that game for a good while now. So it's nothing theological. I mean, mainstream Shia Islam is there, you know, in all the books for you to see, and all the major scholars of today, Ayatollah Sistani, Sheikh Wahid Khorasani, Sayyid Sadiq Shirazi, Sheikh Sanad, etc. The list goes on. They all attest to this in their books and lectures. So it's nothing to do with theology. Iran is in the political game. I should add as well, I mean, there are two possibilities other than this whole game of politics. You know, Iran wants to offend no one in the Middle East in order to acquire as many friends as it can, clearly. But putting that aside, if we look at it a little bit deeper, there are two possibilities why any Shia may oppose the film. Mind you, as far as I've seen, there's been a few Shia clerics that have stood against the film. They've done some sort of unity peace treaty. I don't know what it was. People should be aware that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of new imams graduating every year from the Middle East. Half of them get shipped over here. In this day and age, you can get any group of imams to say anything you like. It's all open water there. But there's two possibilities why there may be a Shia who stands against this. The majority, if there are a majority, which there isn't, but the ones who you may see are firstly very scared. This is one thing I want people to take away. The Shia are in a deep state of fear at the moment. Shia genocide is a real thing. What you've seen, Sam, unfold over the past week by prominent mainstream public figures and clerics. Many of them now online are giving lectures. If you go around and see the amount of bigotry we're seeing online, what you've seen over the last week is the tip of the iceberg of what the Shia are suffering from behind the scenes. I tell you, Sam, as I said to you, I'm from a Sunni background. I've been a Shia for maybe 5-6 years. So I've come into this from an outside perspective. And I've discovered the fear, the constant fear that Shia live in is something I believe no one has truly caught on to, because the Shia have generally been quietists and holding this sort of to themselves. So that's one side of the story, why you may potentially see some Shia stand up against it. The other potential is the well-known Batri sect. So there is a sect referred to as Batriya. Sheikh Al-Habib has given many lectures on this.
And sorry, just to clarify for the viewers, Sheikh Habib is who exactly?
The writer of the film, Sheikh Yasser Al-Habib. Yes, he's a cleric. He's the religious religious guide and a spiritual father of the Mahdi Servants Union, and he's the writer of the Lady of Heaven.
So this, and sorry to interrupt, but this is a Shia movement separate from the Iranian regime, independent of other Shia religious figures. It's a closed group based in London. Is that correct?
I mean, as far as I believe, and as far as I've seen, and I think anyone who knows anything about Shia heritage, Sheikh Yasser Habib represents mainstream Shia Islam. This is the truth, and I will come to this point, Sam, to elaborate on that. It's a crucial point about who Sheikh Yasser Habib is, because it's very well known, and they're doing it currently as we speak, trying to brand him as a hate preacher and some type of fringe Shia speaker. Absolutely incorrect, and I'll address that, Sam. I do apologize. I just want to wrap up the point about the Batri sect, and because it is quite important, because there are some people claiming to be Shia, and even coming out like Khamenei from the Iranian regime saying that we don't believe in this, or we can't say this, or we can't do that, or we can't do this. And this Batri sect doesn't represent the mainstream traditional Orthodox main body of Shia Islam. It just doesn't. Really, it doesn't. And to go in more depth there, I think I wouldn't be able to do in the time we have today. And then jumping back to your question again, with Sheikh Yasser Habib. So a very important point, because they are trying to label him as a hate preacher. They are trying to, they've done this for a long time.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt one more time, but when you say they are trying to label Sheikh Habib, the writer of the film, as a hate preacher, you're referring to Islamists, these radicals in both the protesters in the UK and foreign regimes like Iran. Is that what you mean by they?
Yeah, yes, exactly. They're doing it. They are doing it now, meaning these radical protesters who are pushing propaganda online. And regimes like Iran, etc. So they've done this for a while. Anyone who's followed this this scene and things that have been going on, Sheikh Habib's come out a few decades ago with the same stances that he has today. The reason, Sam, this is something very important. This is what I discovered coming into the Shia world 5-6 years ago, because I didn't have any bias. I didn't know who Sheikh Habib was when I first started looking into this history. But I did slowly discover this. There is one reason and one reason only that they are labeling the hate preacher. There isn't a second reason. They will bring second, third, fourth reasons, but they're all side issues. There is one issue, and that is because he is a man of criticism. I.e., he provides healthy doses of criticism, injecting it right into the Muslim community. The Muslim community, unfortunately, is very averse to criticism. They don't have much tolerance for criticism from internal parties of Islam, and especially not from external parties. I think this isn't a secret. Sheikh Al-Habib opposes this. If you go to his website, alhabib.org, at the very top, the landing page, you'll find a quote from him which says, "Shia Islam is an ally of criticism and an enemy of indoctrination." And this is what we've learned from Prophet Muhammad and from his holy family, peace be upon them. Criticism is a fundamental thing. It's our guide. It's we want criticism. We love criticism. We need criticism. Without criticism, we can't maneuver through into the future to correct our wrongs and ills. As perfect as the religion of Islam is, according to all parties of Islam, the fact of the matter is the Prophet isn't with us. We are trying to interpret what we understand from the Prophet. If you can lock on to the Prophet's teachings as they truly are, you will move towards perfection. But you cannot do so without criticism.
Can I ask? as we've discussed, a lot of these protesters are not just unhappy, they are threatening. And they are tied to groups that I think many counter-extremism analysts and many in government would refer to as Islamist. Do you, and does this film and is Sheikh Habib, do you see yourselves as reformists, as people fighting back against Islamists who have hijacked Islam in the West? Do you perceive the Lady of Heaven as a reformist work?
I mean, I never like to use the word reformists. I believe we are, well, our general personal beliefs is that we are trying to lock on to real Orthodox Islam that came by the Prophet. And there's been a lot of deviation from that. Again, we respect people's opinions and the complexities within the Muslim world. Everyone has a right to their views, and everyone has a right to argue for their views. And we encourage discussion and debate. But from our side, our belief, obviously, is what we stand for is the original teachings of the Prophet and his family, peace be upon him, peace be upon him and his family. But I mean, the key thing here, because I mean, Sheikh Habib, me speaking about him being a critic, again, it's a few decades ago he came out harshly criticizing Abu Bakr and Umar and Aisha, and that caused an explosion of this kind of rhetoric against him from these groups that I've just mentioned, labeling him as a hate preacher. And the same thing's happening today. So if you really pay attention, Sam, you'll see that they say this film is hate because it's made by a hate preacher. And then you ask, why is he a hate preacher? And it's because of what he done a couple of decades ago and has been doing for the past 2 decades, which is the same as what he's doing with this film, which is simply depicting and portraying the Shia narrative. So it's a circular argument here. They don't have actually anything on him. What it is, Sam, if we remove all these additions and frail arguments that they lay on top, when we come back down to the core, it's that they are demanding and bullying Sheikh al-Habib and others like him to remain silent about their beliefs. Otherwise, we are going to do a huge smear campaign against you. Cancel culture. That's all it is. It has been nothing else other than that. Sheikh al-Habib hasn't called for any violence. He doesn't call for any sort of forcing religion upon anyone within this country, within other groups of Islam. None of that at all. I mean, funny thing, Sam, is recently, in these past few days, they've been, I mean, these, for as far as I can see, the group of protesters are spreading video online of Sheikh al-Habib where they mistranslate it and try to claim that he calls for violence against other sects of Islam. And I ran back to that video and I'd done a bit of digging. Firstly, they mistranslated the video, and then when I actually found the original video, it's quite hilarious. Sheikh al-Habib was calling for people to fight back against. I mean, this video was just before or sometime before the ISIS occupation of Iraq, and at that time they were bombing holy shrines. They were sort of doing all sorts of grievous things across Iraq. He was one of the first people calling people to fight back against them. And one of the key solutions to the problem is to shut down their radical mosques, because that's where they'd be radicalizing people and propelling. And soon after, ISIS was born, and they're using this against the Sheikh. And I asked them, well, no wonder you're against this. I mean, are you in line with these radicals? Everything they do is it goes back, it bites them back.
Very interesting. Now, the protesters in the UK, my colleagues in the Middle East Forum were looking into some of their affiliations and their links, and we noticed a lot of them seem to come from 2 Sunni South Asian sects, the Deobandis and the Barelwis. Very important within British Islam. They control between them a clear majority of British mosques. Now, do you think their outrage and their protests against you and threats against you, is that organic? Or do you think they're taking a cue from a foreign regime, perhaps the bans that have already been put in place against the film? And I ask that because it's difficult not to think back a little to the Salman Rushdie affair, with foreign regimes inciting Western Muslims to act. Is that the case here, or is British anger among these radical voices protesting the film, or is that more organic? What do you think? What is your take?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to label all Deobandis. I'm sure there are subgroups from within them that are tolerant people, but the harsh reality is that the Taliban are Deobandis, and that tells you sort of everything you need to know about their level of tolerance from what they perhaps learn from their teachings. And it comes back to the Lady of Heaven, Sam. I've used this term, the radical rabbit hole. And my claim is that this radical rabbit hole is a lot deeper than the British public or the wider world know, especially the Western world, because we're seeing intense bigotry from some of the biggest Muslim names across the UK. This bigotry is a real thing. It's fast. I mean, I always stand by this belief, Sam, and I hope not to be proven wrong, and I believe I won't, which is the majority of Muslims are rational, fair people. But intermingled amongst them, especially amongst a lot of their figures, leading figures, is this intense bigotry. And when I say this radical rabbit hole is deeper than we know, I mean, Sam, that this radical rabbit hole goes as deep as Abu Bakr and Umar. I mean, this message, it's a very important message. It is, historically speaking, Abu Bakr and Umar who initiated this type of thinking. We always claim, and
can I ask then, based on that, without meaning to put words in your mouth, because it's a sectarian question, is this primarily a Sunni Islamist problem, or do you also have these concerns within Shia Islam as well?
So again, I always shy away from taking that approach, because the last thing anyone needs is any sort of sectarian feelings, amongst the Muslims. So, I always say that, always say, I did say today, and I repeat that the majority of Muslims have nothing to do with all this nonsense, but it is a historical reality that we have to look at. So when I say Abu Bakr and Umar are the origins of groups like ISIS, that has nothing to do with the general population that refer to themselves as Sunni. The majority of the population that refer to themselves as Sunni may tell you, I cherish Abu Bakr and Umar, but they don't know the first thing about history. They're just a community of people that were born into a certain religion. It has nothing to do with the people that exist today. It's a historical reading, trying to figure out where this radicalism comes from. And traditionally speaking, Shia Islam, as well as I believe general history, tells us it comes from Abu Bakr and Umar. So because you asked me, is it organic? This type of bigotry we see. I mean, it depends specifically what you mean by that, but it is something embedded in something that's been inherited through history. Most Muslims don't know where to begin in order to be able to pinpoint it. I think the Western world is lagging very far behind in being able to tackle this. Sheikh al-Habib is famously been campaigning and saying that radicalization and terrorism is a issue of software, not hardware. Fighting them, fighting these groups is going to solve the issue very minimally. It needs to be solved ideologically. And the very first step to solve this, doesn't matter who ends up being right or wrong, Sam. What matters is this step needs to be taken, which is a frank, open, honest discussion about Islamic history. How far back does this radical rabbit hole go? Our claim is it goes back to the very day they murdered Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon his family, or they murdered Lady Fatima, peace be upon her. From there, everything spun out of control. If we disagree, let's enter into healthy discussions and debates. But Sam, how can we, if there's one side shutting the door for this discussion to even take place?
I see. Now, the government, as I mentioned in the introduction, just recently fired its Islamophobia advisor, who had, I think, endorsed the cries of blasphemy directed against you by these protesters. Do you feel the government, the British government, has your back? Do you feel it's as shocked as you are by this violence, by this upset, and is on your side? Is that your sense?
I think, Sam, it's quite obvious that the government, the British public, any fair and rational person is on our side, and these sentiments have been all across the internet now. It's clear as day for anyone to see, and that was expected. I mean, we're not saying anything other than, let's stick by our principles and values of freedom of speech. Let's discuss Islamic history openly. No side gets to bully the other side to enforce their positions on anyone else, and that's all it is, Sam. And I really, it's hats off to the British, to the government of the United Kingdom for sacking their advisor on Islamophobia, because it's absolutely disastrous. I mean, Sam, we're talking about protests where they were holding up heroes of ISIS. They were chanting infidel Shia, infidel Shia. They were chanting very clearly, death to Yasser al-Habib, death to Yasser al-Habib, who's the writer of the film. And the ones leading the protests were, at times I see them passing, holding out the mic when they chant these very words I've just said, holding the mic out to them. And then you have pro-Taliban organizations like Five Pillars, which is an official regulated news outlet, supposedly Muslim news outlet in this country, backing these supporters also. It's all just disaster on top of disaster, Sam.
Okay. And lastly, I mentioned the Salman Rushdie affair. No one has had any physical harm yet, thank God. But do you fear that this scandal, this anger could go on for years, like the Salman Rushdie affair, that this could be something you'll need to be worrying about in 5 years, 10 years from now? Or do you think this is a short-lived explosion from a few angry Islamist youth?
Sam, it has already been going on for years. It's been going on for decades, generations, centuries. Sam, Shia genocide is a real thing. Really, it's one of the great horrors of recent times and of history. And it's something that we haven't picked up in the West and in popular tradition. It's something very important. It comes to mind, I don't know if you know the name, Sheikh Hassan Shihata. He was a prominent scholar in Egypt, very well known for his studies and lessons on the Holy Quran. And he converted to Shia Islam. His story was all over the news. And what was he doing at the time, Sam, after converting? He was doing the exact same thing Sheikh al-Habib was doing. There's actually a video online where Sheikh Hassan Shihata calls in to one of Sheikh al-Habib's live shows. And Sheikh Hassan Shihata starts thanking the Sheikh for his work, for speaking about these important matters. Sheikh Hassan Shihata had done exactly the same thing as Sheikh al-Habib done. And what happened to Sheikh Hassan Shihata? Ask any Shia, they'll tell you, and it was all over the news actually. Because he was speaking openly about this history, he was criticizing Abu Bakr and Umar and what they've done and why he holds the views he does. A mob approached his house, a large mob. Go see the videos. It's crowds, you can't even see where they end. And they came and they dragged him out of his house. They dragged his companions out of his house. They dragged him across the street. They were beating him, and he was all bloody and bruised. Then he was murdered. He was killed. And why was he killed, Sam? He was killed because he was a Shia expressing his views about history. And that he's for us a symbol and icon of our time, because that story, again, like what we see in the last week, is a small, tiny tip of the iceberg of what the Shia are dealing with behind the scenes. So that is really what's going on here. And if you'd allow me to add one more thing, Sam, to this whole discussion and debate. I am hearing some voices say, all those I've been debating on the news recently, as well as others I'm discussing with offline, they're saying, and people I'm speaking to who I do not class as radical, I do not class as extremists, I class them as rational people. They're saying perhaps, this is not a majority viewpoint, it's a minority viewpoint, but it's important to address it because people can fall into this mistake. It's one of their primary bully tactics that they apply to get everyone to fall in line, which is they'll say, and Dr. Sheikh was saying this from Oxford Islamic Center on GB News the other night. He was saying that we have to be silent about these things or there will be violence. Now the people saying this I'm not worried about them committing violence. And they're not saying that. They're saying there's this group and they will commit violence, so don't speak about this. I think this is the easiest way to guarantee that we will never solve this issue, and we will never solve the issue of radicalization globally ever. I think it's the most dangerous thing, because if we fall in line with that thinking, first of all, we're mimicking the exact sentiments of these radicals. We're saying the exact same words as them. It's just instead of us doing violence, we're saying, be careful, they will do violence, so keep quiet. That's the first problem. The second problem is we cannot go around playing whack-a-mole with every group that speaks about any specific topic that they believe in, that the radicals disagree with, in order to protect ourselves from the radicals. That would be a preposterous way to live life. That would be a preposterous future. I mean, if we went down that road, goodbye Britain, goodbye to our British values, goodbye to any type of democracy, goodbye to everything.
Yes, I think absolutely. And clearly there are valuable lessons for Western policymakers with your words there as well. Now, thank you so much for your time. We have gone a bit over, but it's been fascinating to hear from you. For those Americans in our audience, which is most of them, who want to see your film, how do they do so?
Visit ladyofheaven.com. All the info there is always updated. Obviously, we're now trying to push the film into other regions and VOD. So hopefully you'll see that soon. And yeah, ladyofheaven.com. Everything you need is there.
Okay. Well, Abdul Malik, thank you so much for joining me. To our audience, you can view future webinars by the Middle East Forum by going to meforum.org and signing up there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.